Alternative Reality, Volume 1, Chapter 13. Whale blinked. Once, twice. He was back. No more visions. The chamber was still illuminated by that sickly red glow, and while Whale stared at it, a message popped up right in the middle of his view. Do you wish to change your class to Warlock? Whale had to admit he did not expect this. Did he wish for a cool new class? Maybe, but expect? Definitely not. He never heard of such a class like that, which could only mean this might just be an extremely rare one. That or Whale just wasn't very knowledgeable on the ins and outs of alternative reality. A ridiculous notion, obviously. Whale snorted at the very thought of it. Alternative reality had a certain class system with an unannounced number of them. Players could choose and easily unlock a number of common classes. You could simply read up on them inside their official webpage outside the game to better decide. That's the boring way though. You could also go search the world for rarer picks. Classes that were unknown and usually required specific criteria to unlock. Sometimes it was a quest, sometimes an item, mostly a lot of grinding, be it for money, reputation, or who knows what else. Not that long ago, Whale had discovered a fan page where some of the acquisition methods for the less coveted discoverable classes were available, yet he couldn't remember seeing anything there about this one. Warlock. Whale got lucky. Finally, he could ditch this unprofitable fire-based magician's class. Though Whale had to admit, burning living creatures alive had its charms. If one was a lunatic like him, that is. He made some good memories, but it was time to let go. After all, Whale had dreams of becoming rich to accomplish. Yes was the only reasonable choice. Congratulations, you've changed your class to Warlock. New spells unlocked. Class bonuses have changed. Unlock the hidden class item properties. Plus 100 fame. Quest added. Legacy of the Forgotten. Description. Before humanity rose to power, another race ruled the land. A vast and prospering kingdom, its glory all but forgotten over the passage of time. Find out more about this long-lost civilization. Restrictions, Warlock. Difficulty, C. Reward, unknown. Penalty upon failure, will revert to previous class. May only fail upon dismissing the quest. Plus 20 fame for starting a legendary quest chain. A chain quest? Another surprise. It was even forced on poor Whale without his consent. He glanced at the content. A waste of time by the looks of it. No set timer though, so Whale didn't need to rush or anything. There were other, more important and preferably financially secure prospects. Plus, the unknown reward part made him feel cautious. Wouldn't be surprised if that was another pitfall the damn game wanted to push him into. Now for the fun part. Whale checked his new spells. Seems like he got more than one and couldn't wait to try them out on some innocent and oblivious passerby. Preferably adorable. That's our frustrated Whale. Venting on things others might otherwise like. A true contrarian. Fireball. Intermediate level 5. 86.2% progress. The most basic fire-based spell. Conjures a fireball. Can be managed in any way decided upon by the wielder. Can set on fire and cause damage over time. The overtime effect causes damage according to set circumstances. Base fire damage 164 to 251 damage. Base overtime fire damage 15 damage per second. Mana cost 13 mana per use. Casting time 1.4 seconds. Damage increased by 15% due to wisdom. Mana cost reduced by 20% due to intellect. Casting time reduced by 20% due to intellect. Seems like his original spell remained unchanged. With him through thick and thin. Always beside when he needed a spark, a friend. Probably the best he ever had, the only one as well. By now Well grew attached to this most basic of basic spells. So many good memories. Sure, there was a time when he only managed to set his own feet on fire. Or his robe. Not the best of times, sure. All those spent funds on new gear. All that quarreling with customer service. Still, Fireball gave more than it took away. Loads of fun, plenty of laughs, a number of uses even without its combat abilities. This was definitely a good thing. Whale felt satisfied for a few moments. Then he returned to his usual grumpy self and moved on. Soul Siphon, Novice Level 1. Curses an area dealing periodic damage to its victims. Channels the suffering of those afflicted by the curse and turns it into health for the caster. Upon death, the victim's soul is brought under the will of the caster. Does not stack. Reapplying the curse upon the target only refreshes its duration. Damage over time, 17.25 damage per second. Damage to life, 25%. Area of effect, 10 meters. Duration, 40 seconds. Mana cost, 64 mana. Casting time, 3.2 seconds. Cooldown, 15 seconds. Damage increased by 15% due to wisdom. Mana cost reduced by 20% due to intellect. Casting time reduced by 20% due to intellect. Vengeful Reanimation. Novice Level 1. Calls upon the souls of the tormented, possessing the nearby deceased to bring about vengeance upon the world. Maximum number of minions, 10. Minion strength, 40%. Minion health, 125%. Mana cost, 160 health. Soul cost, 1 soul per minion. Mana cost per minion, 1.6 mana per second. Casting time, 1.38 seconds. Summoned creatures are extremely aggressive and will attack foes on sight. Hard to control. Reanimation will last until mana supply is disturbed or the minions are destroyed. Minion strength depends on the bodies used. Minion strength increased by 15% due to wisdom. Cost reduced by 20% due to intellect. Casting time reduced by 20% due to intellect. Two new spells that complemented each other perfectly well. Sure, the theme of them was wholly deranged, but it was perfect for someone as loony as Whale was. One provided a way to regain health and a source of souls, while the other served as the perfect means to get some meat shields and keep away any unwelcome melee attackers. Although it did depend on souls as a regent, so it would require some setting up, not to mention bodies to use. The only detriment to these new spells was that Soul Siphon replaced Inferno, A big, sad loss, but an understandable one since Inferno clashed with his new combo. Sure, he could maybe gather souls more quickly, but if he deployed both area of effect spells, would there be any bodies left to reanimate? Can't exactly raise a pile of ashes to wreak havoc, now can you? Something told Whale that he wouldn't miss it much. All those items he lost to the fire still sent pangs of pain to that heart-shaped wallet of his. So, in a way, he kind of gained more than he lost. Sustaining a larger number of those critters would probably be a headache, though, Will mused. There was a huge mana upkeep cost for each one. 1.6 mana per minion. That was insane. If his math was right, which was a very slim chance, he could only maintain the maximum number of minions for a couple of minutes at most, before his mana ran out. No way was that enough to be of any real use in a prolonged fight. Not to mention just 10 minions was a ridiculously small amount to satisfy his power fantasy. What kind of evil army was composed of 10 minions? He'd be the laughingstock of everyone. Again. With no other choice, he'll be forced to stay low and level up the spell as much as possible to reduce the mana cost and increase the amount of minions summoned. He was damn stubborn when it came to these things, so it was only a matter of time. Where there was a will, there was a way. To become an evil overlord of an undead legion. Eventually, maybe, hopefully. Thinking everything through reminded Whale of something. He had 2 strange tomes in his satchel, tomes he couldn't identify before. A few minutes were spent rummaging through his medium-sized container, like the great pit of loot that it was. Typical for a hoarder. A few deep breaths, and he had both the leather-bound books in hand. Well, what do you know? Whale exhaled, with a satisfied look on his face. Who else could be proud of Whale if not Whale himself, after all? Life Tap. Sacrifice your own life force for magical essence. Swaps 20% health for 10% mana. Cooldown 1 second. Soul Link. Shares the life force between the caster and the selected minion. Connects the fates of both. Sharing damage, healing, and any other effects. Damage transfer. Half and half. Healing and soul transfer. 75% to 25%. Mana pool sharing. Half and half. Must be active to have the intended effect. Success! 2 new spells. Whale never had this many in his short virtual lifetime. He might just get confused which one to use in what situation. But let's leave the worries for later. What interested Whale most was the first one, Life Tap. Oh yes. Now Soul Siphon spell had a whole new purpose, a function. Or multifunction, to be exact. Not only would it deal moderate damage and gather souls from those who fell prey to it, Soul Siphon will now serve as an additional mana supply. Since minions will serve as meat shields, Whale will be able to life tap all the excess health into mana. Which will mean that maintaining a large number of minions for longer periods of time will no longer be a headache. Combining the 2 spells will serve as a formidable tool in Whale's conquest of alternative reality. He couldn't help but release an evil mastermind-like laugh and proceed to chuckle away his sanity. What little of it he had, that is. It didn't take long before his self-awareness returned, and suddenly embarrassed, he stopped and glanced around, just to make sure no one was watching. Can never be too sure that someone isn't making fun of you just around the corner. Finally, he was left with Soul Link, a complete wild card as far as Whale could figure, with no obvious use of it that he could come up with. Use it on reanimated minions to boost their tankiness? Exchanging the health he'd lose that way to instead get more mana with life tap seemed like a better option. Not to mention that he'd also be sharing the gathered souls, whatever that did to a temporary summon. Really, as of this moment, he could only stare at it with disgust. Either this spell will be one of those useless spells everyone has tucked away in some far-off corner, forgetting it even exists, or he'd discover a use for it eventually. Finally, there were some changes to his passive abilities. Summoning Mastery, Novice Level 1. Strengthens summoned creatures and the control over them. Health increased by 10%. Damage increased by 10%. Control increased by 5%. Spell Mastery, Novice Level 1. Increases the overall damage of spells. Reduces cost. Damage increased by 10%. Mana cost reduced by 5%. Soul Mastery, Novice Level 1. Determined by the number of souls gathered by the caster. Provides various effects and bonuses. Current effects. Increase damage to creatures below the 15% health threshold by 10%. Increases the damage to creatures under the effect of Soul Siphon by 5%. Seems like Fire Mastery got completely replaced by Spell Mastery, with very similar effects. Basically, the range of spells the bonus covered got expanded, which implies that Whale might get spells with different attributes. That was great news indeed, as it will help fight enemies with strong resistances, unless they have a resistance to overall magic. We'll probably need to avoid foes of that sort altogether. Next, oh yes, 2 more. Summoning Mastery seemed the most promising to Whale. Leveling it up would end up enhancing his summoned minions, making them even more useful. Not only that, but having a mastery on summoning meant that he wouldn't be limited to just vengeful reanimation, which was also fantastic. He just couldn't wait to find out what others goodies Alternative Reality had prepared. Specters and fiery monsters? Maybe even something completely outside the box like food. Would really cut down his costs? Only time would tell. Considering how crazy the game has been so far, he wouldn't be surprised by anything anymore. Finally, Soul Mastery. Another wild card. By the look of it, Whale's future will revolve around gathering and using souls. Obviously, that seemed like a total headache and a complete bother. Whale hated resource management. As if managing his mana wasn't enough, now he has an additional cost to worry about. Not much he can do about it, however, so Whale could only wait and see how it went. Maybe he'd find ways to make the whole thing easier. Worst scenario, he could try searching the internet for some information. Truly, a last resort. Whale shook his head at the very thought of it. That would be the same as asking for someone's help. Whale could never depend on others. Sure, he might extort others, but that's different. It's not dependency. Definitely not his style. Since Whale was a truly honest and straightforward individual, owing someone a favor was a hard burden to bear. He might be an extremely mean person in many cases, slightly insane, paranoid and egotistical, greedy, self-serving, and, well, was a lot of things. But he was still fair. He paid back his debts. Always. Though it was usually in the form of revenge. Positive resolutions were a rarity. Examples of him doing so could basically be counted on just one hand. God only knows what made him like that. Was he just delusional and actively deceiving himself? Puffing up his fragile ego and justifying his own ugly actions to maintain some semblance of inner balance? To not fall apart? Or was this simply the result of someone who spent way too much time on their own, together with his thoughts, overanalyzing himself over and over again, putting each and every trait and action under the grinder until such an exaggerated and twisted sense of fairness came about? Who could really tell? To Whale, as far as he could tell, it was all very simple. His life has been full of hardships, so it was only fair that he paid back tit for tat. All the harm done to him needed an equal measure of repayment. While the good things that came his way, rare as they were something he already earned by virtue of those hardships. So why should he bother repaying? Quite the work of art our Whale was. Slipping away from that little tangent of his, Whale's thoughts went back to alternative reality. Without a doubt, life inside the game was getting more and more interesting. A small danger bell started to ring inside Whale's head at that. A little more, and he might just forget about life outside it completely. Which wouldn't turn out too well. What were the people creating this game thinking? Were they some group of evil masterminds bent on creating the ultimate addicting environment? To suck every single person inside of it, forcing them to wither away in reality? Whale shuddered at the thought. He couldn't stand the thought that someone out there was actually more evil than he was. He was easy to distract though. Now that the spells were all done with, Whale was ready for dessert. It looked like the hidden attributes on the items he got were finally revealed. Demon's Bind. Description: once a crazed blacksmith forged this dagger from unknown materials. Some said he was possessed. Some said people used to disappear around his home. None could prove any of it. When someone ballsy enough to gather an angry mob finally appeared, the blacksmith was already gone. All that was left was this dagger. It is said that this weapon can bind the souls of its victims to the bearer's will. Durability: 40 out of 40. Damage: from 25 to 33. Requirements: level 75, 20 strength, 60 intelligence. Restriction: warlock. Plus 20 wisdom and plus 20 intelligence. Plus 20 fame. Minus 75 reputation. Chance of an angry mob appearing with the intent to burn you at the stake. Does an additional 25 black magic damage per hit. Reanimates the victim, binding his/her soul to the bearer's will. Soulbound. Will not drop upon death. Robes of Borellus. Description: once worn by Borellus, a follower of the old way, served the last warlock as an apprentice. Used in choosing the next warlock candidate. Durability: 31 out of 35. Defense: 15. Requirements: level 75, 50 fortitude, 50 wisdom, 80 intelligence. Restrictions: warlock. Plus 600 health and plus 30 intelligence. Plus 15 fame. While wearing, marked as a heretic by major religions. Minus 100 reputation. Soulbound. Will not drop upon death. Hidden. He guessed it. Those items he borrowed changed completely, and they were simply ridiculous. These were low-level items. On the rare side, sure, but they were still low-level, considering that the intellect bonus, as an example, was sky high. Not to mention the other bonuses and additional effects. Of course, the loss of reputation was quite the downside. For most players, that is. Not for Whale. Reputation in general seemed quite useless to him. This was Whale we were talking about. A person who went beyond the line of no return. To any other player, losing so much reputation at this level would have been a devastating blow. No sane person could take the constant weird eye given by every non-player character, NPC for short, around. Not only that, but bartering or simply conversing with some of them would prove almost impossible. Which would mean no medical supplies, no gear, and no money. Basically, one would be forced to join the underworld, be it bandits or some other outside of the law organization. As if a loss in reputation wasn't enough, you would also be marked as a heretic and shunned or even hunted by all major religions. Which was probably the worst inconvenience for any player hoping to form a party with other NPCs. Almost all the healing classes belonged to some major religion, since they were mainly priests and clerics, with a few exceptions. One of those would be druids, but they were quite rare, and a negative reputation would make it hard to interact with them to any reasonable degree. You'd most likely be seen as some arsonist and a threat to nature, to be hunted down all the same. Maybe fed to some wild animal for good measure. Imagination is the limit. Last resort, combat medics. Military trained medics who are experts at first aid and were more soldier than healer, really. Sure, they don't use magic and their healing is the worst of all, but they are usually surprisingly good fighters and excel at it. Regrettably, they usually belong to military orders, which were directly related to the government. End result, hanged as a criminal. Simply put, you would be pretty much doomed. All that just covers the NPC part of the whole experience, of course. Players were a slightly different story, since they were not obligated to follow the set rules of this world. Not obligated, but gently forced to either way. Going against said rules would more often than not result in a loss of reputation, after all, and often hinder overall progress. Following the rules, though, gave great benefits and unexpected or expected by now quests. So even if one hoped to find a friend who would support you, disappointment loomed just around the corner. Quite a few stories drifted about, speaking of broken companionships due to clashing interests and differing reputations. Truly, a path of many hardships. Just what the doctor ordered. Whale could only smile. All of the above? Whale was used to it in real life. It's not like he wasn't kicked out of a church before, due to reasons he'd rather not share. One day, he'd get back at them for it. Years of suffering helped him twist his inner world upside down, making life an easier place to get by in. Like a wild animal, he adapted to the environment, expecting only the worst and always being ready for it. Most of the time. Someone gave him the weird eye, an impatient waitress gave him the angry look, someone took the last slice of pie he so wanted right from under his nose. Whale welcomed it all. It all served only to nail in his purpose in this sad play of life. Both his feeling of being the victim and the justification for the right of it. That's right, he was the victim. A reflection in the mirror, a reaction, a ripple on the surface. He was simply giving the world back what he received, and there was plenty of giving back left. What a crybaby. Conditions have been met in alternative reality as well. Once he puts on the items, it would be Whale against the world. No allies, no friends, odds stacked heavily against him. What could prove more fun? He could vent every single last drop of any pent-up frustration without hesitation, with a valid excuse as well. Conscience clear of any guilt, he stuffed the robe inside the satchel and got ready to grind down those remaining levels. Whale was level 71 at the moment, which meant he needed to level up 4 more times before he could put on those items. And the double experience bonus was still in effect. This was going to be a walk in the park.